Hello, I'm Vidar Oswald, the program chair for the Chesapeake chapter, and we brought today Len Levine from that works with the government, and he's been very active in the last couple of years in getting DoDAF and UPDM, and now he's working on UAF and trying to get them to be used in the development of architectures. And so he's, of course, OMG has been the group that has been doing that for years, and they're the ones in charge of all the standards. So their standards are going to be updated as we speak to become an ISO standard, and so that's going to be used internationally in Europe and Australia and so on. So let's have Len talk about his experiences in working with OMG, and also when he worked with the government, he also mandated and had some of those standards mandated for use in the DoD.
We can save that for the question and answer period about DoD mandating use of standards. Good. Thank you very much for introducing me. I have a little bad back, so if I sit down at some point or walk around, you will excuse me.
Well, I thought I'd give them a teaser so they don't leave.
Okay. We have no more than an hour. I have many slides. Without the backup, it's 30 slides, 50 slides with the backup. It can be used for various purposes. I intend to go through the 30 slides, but not to read the 30 slides to you, but to talk to you about what I think is important on those slides. First of all, there's the intro page there, and I've been told that it will be made available or is available on the website. And we'll try out the acknowledgements. I didn't do UPDM, Unified Profile, for DoDAF and MODAF by myself. I did not write DoDAF, DoD Architecture Framework, by myself. Have I contributed to various aspects of it? Yes, my greatest participation has been with the UPDM group at the Object Management Group, the OMG. I am also the co-chair of the liaison subcommittee of the OMG. And one of my missions is to get specifications. OMG does specifications, standards. There's a legal difference. Substantive, no. Legal, regulatory, yes. They take their specifications, and when they're ready, they get ISO to adopt them, and they become full international standards. It doesn't happen to all OMG specifications. I'm not doing DoD policy today. You can ask me questions. I may answer, may not. Most likely, I'm not involved with the DoD policy that you have in mind. And I will just tell you that if you ask that questions. This presentation will probably be republished with or without revision as an OMG document available to the public. Some of the slides are derivative, other people's works. Some of them are my work that has been reworked, enhanced by others and back to me. In this business, that is very, very common. In the past, I have taught object-oriented analysis and design before the UML, Unified Modeling Language, was adopted. I have C++, Fortran, and half a dozen languages, which I have not done any computing in the last 6 years. In my retirement, which is coming up soon, I might want to teach something of that sort again as a change. My original field, well, that's a semi-true statement, was in international relations, political science, and defense policy. Always was interested in computers, and as soon as they got rid of the blankety-blank IBM Holler cards as the way that you did your work, I got back into the field. I was an intelligence analyst at the CIA for a couple years, And then immediately thereafter, PCs were coming out, mini computers, faxes. I said, this is for me. The old IBMs, the old Honeywells with the refrigerated floors and the punch cards, not for me. I'm making an assumption about the audience. I'm not going to talk about a definition of what systems are or what systems engineering is. There's no one answer. There are probably at least 24 good answers to those questions. Any one of them will probably do for purposes of talking about systems and systems of systems. I am thinking of either a physical or virtual entity. Could be bricks and mortar. It could include people, not include people, but your system has a boundary. There are things that are outside of it, and there are things that are inside of it. Things that it acts upon and things that act upon it. It has an internal structure. SysML, how many in this room know some fundamentals of the systems modeling language, SysML? Okay, I'm not going to lecture on SysML, but UPDM is built upon SysML. SysML is built upon unified modeling languages with significant changes and a lot of religious discussion, which I am not going to get into tonight. So I'm assuming that this stuff is not new to you. An architecture comes in 3 flavors, or probably more. You can have a system of systems, which begs the question of what a system is, how systems talk to each other. You can have a system, a reference system, a solution, reference architectures, a solution architecture, and an enterprise architecture. The tools that I'm talking about have all been used throughout the range of architectures, from enterprise architectures to systems of systems to systems architecture. My perspective on the systems architecture, my prejudice is talking about viewpoints and views. There's an ISO standard on that. I have that in mind. I'm not going to define it. But a viewpoint can be any one of you. Maybe we have a viewpoint towards a system. Doesn't mean the system changed. That's our viewpoint of that system. Could be a traffic light system, and I'm concerned how red the red is, and that's my viewpoint. And I could have half a dozen views that tell me the red can be measured this way or that way, or can be visualized this way or that way. It doesn't change the system. Somebody else is concerned only with the purity of the electricity coming in to make the computer operating the traffic light system change. He's only interested in the purity of the electricity. Does not change the system. It's a different viewpoint. So you'll excuse me, I think I should sit down for a bit now. Okay. Okay. So on slide 3, you can read our simple agenda. We're going to talk a little history. We'll talk a little present tense, and we'll talk about what's in the near-term future. So when I'm talking about futures, I am not talking about pie in the sky 20 years from now. I'm talking about the next 2 to 5 years. And when I go back in history, it goes back a little further, about 20 years of history of architecture frameworks that are relevant. Okay, where do we start? This is slide 3, slide 4. What was? UPDM as a specification is history now. Version 1.0 versus 1.1. These are out. The whole 1.x series is out. It came from some sources. There was DoDAF, which was, you'll see in another slide if I get to it. It had antecedents. DoDAF 1.5 had 1.0. It had another C4ISR framework before it. The British do MODAF. NATO does NAF. And if you were trying to animate this, you would show that at any point in time, one is a little more advanced, either technologically or theoretically than the other. But basically, they're all the same. And between the British and the Americans, you are debating things that are really not in the architecture so much, but around the architecture. What does a billet mean to someone who's British versus a billet mean to somebody who's an American? So if you can think of terminology, of an ontology, and of views and viewpoints, you are down in the weeds before you're talking a difference. But people made livings out of the weeds, and probably will in the future. So as I said, UPDM applied UML modeling to DoDAF and MODAF, built upon SysML. Because of this leveraging, major tool vendors, including IBM, Rhapsody tool, NoMagic's Magic Draw, PTC, which has gone through a series of acquisitions, has the Artisan Workbench, what was called the Artisan Workbench, and leaving out another Sparks EA, Sparks Enterprise Architect is out there. They all are compliant with UPDM, and they all came on board with UPDM 1.0 or 1.1. So there are the architecture frameworks, there are the specifications, and the tools to go along with it. So people of goodwill have been supported by theory, by specification, and by practice. I should say at this point, if you are out there building a system, unless you're a theoretician, you are probably using the tool and not debating the fine points of an ontology. You may hire an ontologist. You may woe the day that you did, but you could hire one that is probably not the business that you're in. Okay, oops, wrong way. Okay, model-based systems engineering is a big debate going on right now, whether it's the term has outlived its usefulness, but is a good fit for the types of specifications I am talking about. And I'll ask you the opposite question. If you're going to build a system, would you not have a model? It may not be a SysML model. It might not be Len Levine's model, but I would hope that for any system of any significance, you have a model and you are sharing it with your team members and others that are building and maintaining, transforming, revising your system. So MBSE may be in or out, like at one time artificial intelligence was in and then it's out and then now back in. There's nothing wrong with the term model-based systems engineering. Oops, keep on coming back to that one. Okay, what is? Right now, the current version of UPDM is one called 2.1. 2.1 has had better meta modeling and better compliance of tools, including model interchange. A lot of work has gone on among the tools that I just mentioned, that they are able to interchange their models. Think of the models as the data that drives the system engineering effort. So they can take the same system and define it in one tool and transport it to the other and back and forth. Not without flaw, but it can be done, and not a lot of problems. The problems that come up again in the fine points, as you can imagine. Different interpretation of the same model, two tool vendors, same specification, they'll look at UPDM or something else and say, it means blah, 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 blah. We were on the team that built it. Another one will say, it means something else. I was on the team that built it. So there's always a possibility that there will be a intellectually honest, but disagreement about what the models mean. Some very nice companies are up there. You may have worked for some of those companies. Government as well as defense industry. Oops. Okay, 2.1. We talked about views before. And why is it popular among the practitioners? There are some alternatives, but is the main alternative. If you're using SysML, this makes sense because it goes further, adds things such as project management. It adds a vision, if you have a vision, so if you have requirements and vision, et cetera, it's a natural fit. Yeah. The way that UPDM gets adopted, first of all, within the object management group, there's something called the request for proposals. Possibly you could get 2 responses or more responses from groups. Quite often there is 1 response. Leaving out a lot of rather nasty politics of about 8-9 years ago. This has been a relatively non-political set of people. The 3 co-chairs of the UPDM group. A little incestual. We write the request for proposal, but we have to sell it at the OMG. It gets approved. The request for proposal gets responded to, and it gets responded to publicly. So we write up a response. That becomes a beta specification. It goes through an adoption. You sell it, you publicize it, you get it adopted through various committees. At some point, you could say the technology has been adopted. Your proposal has flown. Not all proposals, not all RFPs get responses, not all responses lead to a beta specification, and not all beta specifications get adopted. But you do get adopted. You go to something called a finalization task force. So somebody says, well, I'm writing it. It was adopted by OMG last year, and I put it in my tool. My response is, you are working at risk, because before it's finalized, it could change significantly. Then it gets into use. The revision task force, usually smaller changes. So UPDM 2.0, 2.1. And then you go to a new request for proposal for something major changes. UPDM 2.1 has been out for a while. It is stable. Various tools are out there using it. And we are now bringing it to ISO. UPDM 2.1 will become UPDM 2.11, known inside OMG. At the very moment, it is in Geneva with the ISO people, specifically ISO, IEC, JTC1, Joint Technical Committee 1. And they're reviewing it. They take it in as a publicly available specification. It's been voted on. There was some responses by 2 countries. We made some revisions. Turned out did not change the digital aspects of it, but did clarify a bit. And it's back at this very moment for voting. Similar process for SysML. Right now, the SysML 1.4 is the current specification, except it isn't, because 6 months ago we came up with 1.4.1, which answered the ISO objections to SysML. Okay. The ISO standard number is 19513. Coincidentally, SysML is 19514. They're both now as known as final draft international standards, and the month or two from now we'll know whether we make it as a full international standard. So the close relationship between DoDAF and UPDM is well established. DoDAF, MODAF, NATO architecture framework, some others. Canadians had a framework called DINDAF. It's all been incorporated. The larger architecture frameworks tell you to do a lot of other things other than meta modeling and building systems. They tell you how the process of building a system. The UPDM and what now become Unified Architecture Framework has not gotten into that. The unification has been primarily on the ontology, the meta model, the ontology on the one hand, and the views and the viewpoints on the other hand. So we had a request for proposal for UPDM 3, and we wanted to make it, evolve it away from the military's sphere. Our goal had been all along to make this more commercial so that the governments don't have to pay for what, in essence, is a commercial specification and tool. I can tell you, if you look inside DoDAF, especially the meta model and the views, you'll find very, very little that's military specific. Same thing with MODAF and same thing with NAF. You could very easily define a system such as a new automobile. There's very, very little that's military in there. So we've had support at the DoD CIO architecture engineering for about a decade with the goal, without costing the United States government or any other government significant amount of money other than membership in these organizations, to bring it from a government DoD or government concept to a industry consortium such as the OMG to a full public international standard such as ISO. And I can give you names of people, et cetera, but there have been a series of directors of that office and people who have worked there. Yes, this is not their goal. It wouldn't be wonderful if tools would appear and that it could stop developing DoDAF. So about 5 years ago, in essence, DoD stopped doing DoDAF primarily because they were doing modeling down in the weeds. On the one hand, on the other hand, they're preaching to the choir about how to do architecture. It was time to say we have finished. We started about 1990, about 5 years ago. It's good enough. There probably will be revisions, but at the moment there are no revisions going on with DoDAF. Okay. So the scope is enlarged from the UAF. So it's not primarily defense oriented anymore, but it is a fully backwardly compatible with DoDAF and MODAF and NAF. So we haven't left it behind, but we're making a strong statement in the response that it was such an industrialization of the product that the name should change. So instead of calling it UPDM 3, we're calling it UAF 1.0. We already talked about profiles and architecture descriptions. We comply with the international standards. Some more support statements. You see SysML there, systems of systems. The profile enables the modeling of strategic capabilities, et cetera. So I emphasize it's an enabler. It doesn't do your modeling for you. It's not an artificial intelligence tool that you press the button, out comes a system. There was a project on formal ontologies called IDEAS, and it is spelled out here, the International Defense Enterprise Architecture Specification Foundation. Turns out to be an ontology, talks about things, things that inherit from things. It's a four-dimensional set of concepts. It is that ontology very much concerned with time, which is not in the previous meta modeling. That is the basis of UPDM and UAF. If you open it up, again, on one side, you have the meta modeling. To understand that meta modeling, I'll send you to ideas, and there are other documents in there, but it's basically a formal ontology, not the type of stuff that end users are likely to ask about. Okay, UPDM 3 becomes UAF. You see a new logo. By the way, these are trademarked, OMG trademarks. And you'll see NAF version 4.0 is there. I'm not sure if it ever came out formally, but we keep up with its developments, and our meta modeling is compatible therewith. One of the problems we have is the number of frameworks continues to evolve. So even though DoDAF has stopped, other architecture frameworks, including NAF, continue. MODAF has also stopped. We would say that in the world, we'd have to be ready for another series of bursts of architecture frameworks. The way we've built, we're ready to map to or to include most of those new frameworks in the unified architecture framework. Can you come up with a name that's been resistant to unification? The answer is TOGAF, and I'm not going to go there at the moment. And I see that as more political problem than technical problem. Their methodologies are orthogonal, and it would take the technical people to make a great leap across to each other. We've talked about it. It's a requirement to do both object-oriented and functional analysis. It's not in my near future. Let's see. Okay. Anyone take chemistry in college or high school? It reminds me of the periodic chart table of elements. And this right now is a mapping. See if I go back one, I think. No. Okay, this is a grid approach to, for example, under constraints on architecture, box A8, lower right hand, the lowest right side, we have the intersection of what UAF would see as architecture with constraints. It's labeled A8. If you look into DoDAF views, it turns out to be something like a TD1. What's a technical view 1? It's a set of standards that you're complying with. It could be other rules, etc. But most of the time in DoD, they're talking about a set of standards. That's how they map the compliance. And that was done with great care so that we haven't left those things behind. The next chart is an eye chart. This is another way of looking at the same. So this is, even though this is not a formal part of the specification, it helps go between the meta modeling and the views, the viewpoints and views that support the system architect and the end user or the sponsor. If you look on the second column, structure column, 1, 2, it intersects with rows of other types of concepts. So it's the structures, metadata, strategic, operational, personnel, resources, security, project, and standard. They all have structure. Okay. And there are views associated with that. Now, if you look at the standards rows, it intersects with taxonomy, structure, roadmap, traceability. A very interesting concept is if you're using standards and you are going to change them. DoDAF has a concept of having TV1 and TV2. TV1 is what I'm building to. TV2 is the future. This takes that idea and goes further. So if you had a week or two to study this, there's a lot of meat in here. We don't have a week or two to study it here. Take my word for it. It's worthy if you're on the theoretical side of studying the last two charts of mapping, and it says if you have a favorite viewpoint, it's in there. It's in the soup. You can be supported. So the viewpoints are not part of the formal specification, but for me, it's the most important part. So there was still controversy about that, but it's the most important part for me. Slide 25 says it's very hard to manage the views with so many contributing frameworks. Therefore, instead of trying to comply with 25 frameworks that are out there, half a dozen military and others, we have to find a way that the tool vendor can use our specification, and if he chooses to map to some more frameworks, can complete his work. Okay, slide 26, another eye chart. The far left, you'll see 1996, far left, lower left, something called the C4ISR framework, and you'll see a lot of other frameworks, and one leads to the other, borrows from, becomes compatible with DoDAF, MODAF, Lower right says UPDM 3.0 or UAF 1.0 in December 2015. So this is about a year ago when it was all but finished. Is the inheritor of all this mishmash of architecture frameworks. If you have a chance to take a look at the specifications for UAF, UPDM, not bad. There's a sample problem in there. There's a separate volume in UAF 1.0. Same basic problem. It's a maritime civilian search and rescue. We're not doing anything classified. There's a vision diagram out there that we want. There's a boat out there that is in trouble. Someone receives the distress call. Assets are dispatched. Current way of doing it, the current system. And there's also parts of the example says that in the future, we wish to be able to respond faster and what is necessary to build such a system. You may have constraints out of SysML that within 15 minutes of receiving a distress call, the system shall respond with such and such assets on the site. That can be accomplished with that. And we do continue to reach out to the UAF technical community, so to the SysML community. So as the system engineering field evolves, we keep up with that in the UAF. For example, parametrics. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the word parametrics. Yeah. Well, that's part of the UAF now, and it's borrowed from SysML. But I would think it's extremely important to someone who's a sponsor of a system that Within 15 minutes, you will be able to effect a rescue if it's received within 200 miles of, or 100 miles, whatever it is, of a rescue, a lifeboat, a rescue station, a Coast Guard station. It's in there. Slide 29. Well, we're a little bit behind schedule. We're about a year behind schedule. That happened with UPDM. It happens with SysML all the time. So I think UAF will not reuse the ISO numbering, the 19513. So much has changed. The consensus is now that it should have its own number. I would expect the UPDM and SysML versions to be available as international standards this spring. I would hope that UAF would be available as an international specification 2 years from this spring. On the last slide, I want to emphasize the place of new technologies, the evolution of the specifications, the standards, and the tools. In this case, we're not dealing with a standard such as ASCII for text, definition of text that was pretty much determined 50 years ago. This is an evolving set of frameworks, specifications, standards, and tools. I think I should stop here. There is, for your enjoyment, if this is what you enjoy, some backups on the search and rescue model that I have included. The full version, when published, will be about 300 pages long, and goes through that basic scenario, old system, current system, new system. I think those who want to learn systems engineering will find this to be of great interest. At this point, I want to go back to the favorite page of questions. So we have about 20 minutes for questions, right?
Right, and we need to have a microphone for the questions so that everybody hears it. We're also recording this.
Hello, Mr. Levine, right here.
Yes. Hi.
Jeff Burlett from Bencor. Question for you. What are your views on the adoption of the framework / standard by industry? You know, going from a specification to a standard, and is industry making moves in that direction now, or should we expect 3-4 years from now?
It is, but none of these things can be, they all can be mandated to some extent, either by a contract, by an organization that wants to do systems engineering in a specific way, by a government that wants to have it a uniform way of expressing its requirements. So when it goes out for an RFP, request for proposal, that's common language. It can be imposed. But on the other hand, it's important to appeal to the practitioners. And the practitioners will evolve. You know, when I first got involved, there were people who were doing this type of design with paper and pen, and then they had people helping them out with change pages. That was a very laborious way. Current generation could not conceive of doing work that way. Just the same way as with programmers used to do Fortran, was assembly language or machine code, very laboriously would write off the design and translate it into Fortran, then have somebody review it, and then have somebody punch it up in a card, and then next week it gets compiled, and the week after that it gets tested and it fails, and then you go back and you debug it. That is all gone. So you have to appeal to an audience that wants to change, and respond to those changes for designing the system. So not only computer programming, but system design has to be agile. Then you go with a pendulum too much. Agile does not mean I am going to build a new space system a new rocket to the moon overnight. That's not agile, that's stupid. On the other hand, I don't have to take 10 years to do the preliminary design and go through a design review. So I need concepts, I need trained people that can use these tools to specify the system relatively quick and make a turnaround. It's a long answer to your question, but I don't think it can be imposed.
If you don't mind, can I just follow up? I was really asking more or less companies that are compliant with UPDM, the major companies that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yes.
Are they making a commitment? Are there plans for them to move to UAF, or is it too early to expect that? What should we?
No, it's too late to expect that. They are already, if they've gone to UPDM, they're already compliant with UAF, because UAF has evolved. So I get asked that question quite often. The method, the ontology has not changed. It's been enhanced. It's been made purer, but it's also invisible to a lot of the people who make decision whether they're going to use UPDM or UAF. So the answer is, if they're using UPDM 2.1, they are 95% compliant with UAF 1.0. They may not have some of the features. They may not be able to share their concepts as readily with the financial community, defensive financial community. But those are relatively minor questions, and I don't think they were the ones that you were asking.
That's good, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Hi, and thanks for the presentation. So I think you mentioned earlier about one of the drivers for going to, I guess, ISO UAF was to kind of give a wider audience, wider use of this stuff, right?
Yes, one of the reasons.
I guess the question is, so given that, if that's true, I assume maybe more commercial stuff or something along those lines. Do you have any insight, or have people come to you and said, hey, if you make this ISO, we would use it for this in our
Yes, they're called Europeans.
So what was their driver for wanting, because,
They're
architecture is
Europeans.
like an elephant, right? What piece you want to use depends on what questions you're trying to.
They don't
answer.
want to be told that their tool evolved from a military architecture framework. They don't want to be told it evolved from a Western defense concept. They don't want to be told it predominantly was made in the US. You will tell them, but IBM UK was one of the prime drivers that says, well, that's still US. So there are many people who want the imprimatur of something that does not say defense. So UAF purposely does not mention defense. Doesn't mention the auto industry either. It's a politics with a little p, with a lowercase p that is involved. I'd gone to another ISO group once, and the only problem they had was the D in the name of UPDM. If it weren't for that, it would have been an international standard 5-6 years ago. We went to a different group that didn't have that problem at ISO.
This back here, the Unified Architecture Framework is, the Unified Architecture Framework is something that can be, to some extent, automated. Are there like case tools that are being developed to?
Case tools are computer-aided software system engineering tools.
Right.
If you're talking about system engineering tools as opposed to software engineering tools, more like UML has software engineering. SysML has system engineering. It's built on top of it. There are a whole set of tools. Now, what would it take for more vendors to come into the marketplace?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking back to last time I actually did any architecture work. We were using DoDAF 1.0, and we were using Popkin.
And your data model was CADM.
Yeah.
Okay. That has been left behind in DoDAF completely. CADM is a swear word. I was about ready to bring it to ISO for standardization 10 years ago. We're going to extract from CADM. CADM was primarily a node-oriented model, primarily great for communications, general architecture, less so. But if you get more people to use it, it would have been wonderful. It was internal DoD, one of the services, not to be mentioned, said, you can't make me use CADM. You can't make me da 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 da. And that was the end of that, of the C4ISR framework and the end of CADM.
But what I'm saying is not, CADM or anything,
Yeah.
It has evolved. It's UAF, right?
Okay.
So,
And the underlying technology are UML tools. So if the tool vendors can do UML, and if they have a couple gurus around, that may be a barrier to entry. The exchange and the definitions are done in something called XMI. And also, OMG standard, it's international standard. It's a XML-based model interchange specification. So if they can do that, they can enter the marketplace with their own tool.
Are there
I think they
tools
can
out
do
there?
it within 12 months.
are there tools out there right now?
Yes.
Okay.
The ones that are out there are the 4 that I've mentioned. I can mention them again if you need an answer. Next question, if anyone.
I got a question. This is a little bit for you to carry on a little bit more about the tools, because you shared the tools that were out there in, I guess, the older days for UPDM 1.1. You shared, IBM Rhapsody, and you said something about
1.2.
Magic Draw by No
Yes.
Magic. So
Yeah.
I'd see if you could update us a little bit on the UPDM 2.1 and
The same
possibly
tool vendors
3.0.
that stood with it.
What are the products called now, and how well are they doing?
They're called the same ones, and they're doing very well. Magic Draw, Cameo from No Magic seems to have a great market appeal. But when I say that, I must tell you, in Europe, PTC's Artisan Workbench has a great audience. And then for smaller projects and enterprise architecture, small enterprise architectures projects, Sparks EA sells like hotcakes. And who have I left out? IBM Rhapsody. It has survived major reorganizations in IBM. They had an internal civil war between IBM Rhapsody and IBM Rational. I think Rational was sold off. It was the first product. It came in with the UML folks, the 3 amigos. Those of you who know that, I won't go into it. And they came out with supposedly a DoDAF and UPDM compliant product, except that it wasn't DoDAF and it wasn't compliant with UPDM. And this is the battle, the 8-year-old battle, where actually UPDM, there was another UPDM 1.0 that OMG declined to issue. So we reissued, we changed the name of it, little politics. We took the initials that everyone loved. The original one was UML model for DoDAF and MODAF. And said, well, we want to make it a little more generic. That we call it the unified model for DoDAF and MODAF. And that fight, it's in the industry rags. I don't want to even think about reliving it. It's without purpose. It's a lot of fighting without purpose. Did I answer the question enough?
Well, you partially answered it.
Okay, what didn't I answer? I
wanted to hear a little bit more about some of the tools.
Where to buy them?
I mean,
how
you were
to
talking
use
about
them?
IBM Rational, and I wasn't sure what you were talking about there, and something being sold out.
IBM Rational has been sold, to my knowledge. IBM Rhapsody, I could give you a point of contact. Graham Bleakley, who is out of the UK, who's headed up as one of the co-chairs of the UPDM group, and he can very easily differentiate the sales of the tool, which goes obviously well beyond the specification and the standard to offer things to someone who was building, let's say, a system of systems. The salesmanship of that I leave to IBM. But the core about the meta model and the views, the viewpoints, and the exchange of those models, all those products, whether they're an IBM product, a Sparks product, a No Magic project, or a PTC project tool, they all do that. Why would one buy one versus the other? The other features that are not in UPDM. It's where do specifications and standards fit into the marketplace? Usually that set of companies that have decided not to fight over certain things because you can't make money on it. Imagine me coming and trying to sell your chief executive on a better systems engineering ontology. He says, can I build something with it? No, but it will be very pretty and it will be theoretically sound. So in essence, the vendors have decided not to fight over such things. Think of word processing right now. Who fights over the concept of a Word document? Or it used to be Microsoft. Before Microsoft was so dominant, it was WordStar, et cetera, various documents. There's no fight anymore. To the point that I was on a committee, a ballot resolution meeting, also about 10 years back, where Microsoft decided to open up its framework, its data structures without restriction, and they came out with something called OOXML. Open Office, Office Open, I can't remember which is, there are two competing standards. And they made that public available. Why? They wanted others to contribute to it. We got things for free. Even Microsoft likes things for free. And there was exchange with the customers. And most important, there was no money to be made out of fighting on this. With what is it, IBM Lotus is out there. There was no money to be. IBM Lotus uses specification ODF, I think, and Microsoft uses OOXML, the two sets of families, and the feud was not worth having. Okay, does that answer a little bit about what we were asking?
And let me make another comment. I believe that those 4 tools that you specified, you're testing those for interoperability.
Yes, there
so
is
you
a
can
model.
move stuff from one to the other.
Yes.
Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to look the same, but the meta model will move, and then it'll look different, but it'll look different for the tool vendors, right?
Now, yes, and if we also say what was in the past, you couldn't exchange information.
Right.
Now you can. So, soon you'll be able to do more. There's even a diagram definition specifications coming through, so they won't look identical, but they, the pyramid. Let's say you were doing an organization diagram. Org diagrams are one of the reviews there. And one, it's a pyramid going up, and another would define it as a pyramid going down. It both comply with the specification in the data. There are missing pieces such as diagram definition. The trend is moving towards more and more of that. Now, if I fast forward 10 years from now, I will not be, hopefully I will be teaching somewhere and vacationing and having a good time. But I would also expect that the threshold for interoperability has gone up a bit. And of course, 4 tools would produce the same looking diagrams approximately, and not have one have a pyramid going up and another have a pyramid going down.
Well, one thing that OMG has forced is for these tool vendors to be interoperable. Before, they just did their own thing, and they knew they would lose market share if they were interoperable. Now they've sort of been forced to do that.
Yeah, and the less controversy, the more internal this is to industry consortium for specifications and standards, the better off. High politics is bad. I will leave you with one story. When I started working with OMG again, I went 3 times in my career. I've worked with them, not for them, but with them. The last time I started doing things with UPDM, senior executive said, get that DoDAF implemented by standards and don't charge the government for it. That was my main mission. I think I've accomplished it. Along the way, there are other things that happened, like SysML is also the tool vendors interoperable. I was drawn into a meeting very similar to this table. Ooh, this could be the sister table. They showed me their interoperability, et cetera, et cetera. And what did I think of it as a DoD customer? And I said, 60% interoperability is not interesting. And I went like, bam, you know, what the hell did you ask me for? You know the answer is no. The table went up. The water and the coffee went all over the place. And there are some people around who still remember that. I don't know if you know Sandy Frieden. Oh. Okay, Sandy will tell you that this is a true statement. He was the one who asked me to come into the meeting and give me my feedback about the interoperability these people were offering. I said, it's useless. Have they come to 100%? No, but I think unless people really go retrograde, say celebrating that they can 60% with a lot of effort, a lot of people, 60% exchange some simple data, I think those days have gone. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going to have a drawing for the
Thank you.
book that Len has selected. Enterprise Architecture as a Strategy. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
It's been a while. Gene Ross is the main author. And what I like about it, it talks about different types of enterprises. So when we're talking about enterprise architecture, first you have to figure out what are the enterprises that are coming together. So if you just bought out, you're a billionaire, such as someone I have in mind right now, and you decided to buy 10 companies, and your goal is by July of next year, they're all going to be unified, and you have to come up with an architecture, put it together. That's quite different than if you were trying to unify, let's say in the banking industry, two companies that used to be loose partners. They share the same culture, blah, 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 blah. There's not a lot of differences, and you want to unify into one. That can be done easily. If you want to unify 10 companies, you want to unify into one by July, you got a lot of work and not a lot of precedent to behind you. That's what I like about it. I haven't read it in years, but that's what I take away from it.
Most of those integrations fail.
Too much. Yes, it'd be better off if they phased it in over a 5-year period of time, two companies, and then finish the unification. That's my advice.